didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. I mean, sure, weird things happened in old buildings, but there was always a logical explanation. Creaky pipes, bad wiring, or just people scaring themselves. That's what I thought when I first moved into my dorm. The building was one of the oldest on campus. A brick and stone relic that had housed students for over 70 years. It had a reputation. People whispered about flickering lights, cold spots, and weird noises at night. But I shrugged it off. I had better things to worry about than ghost stories. That was before I started hearing the footsteps. It always happened late at night, around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd be studying, half awake, staring at my laptop screen, when I'd hear it, soft, measured footsteps pacing outside my door. At first, I thought it was another student, maybe someone pulling an all-nighter or heading to the bathroom. But every time I checked, the hallway was empty. The sound was too precise, too deliberate. Whoever or whatever was walking never hesitated, never stumbled. Just slow, rhythmic steps moving back and forth over and over. One night, I decided to catch whoever was messing with me. The second I heard the footsteps, I jumped up and yanked open the door. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by the emergency exit sign. It was empty, completely empty. But the moment I closed the door, the footsteps started again. My stomach twisted. I barely slept that night, listening to the steady pacing outside my room, too afraid to open the door again. The next day, I told my roommate, Daniel. He was usually the rational one, the guy who never got spooked by anything. But when I brought it up, his face went pale. "You hear it too?" he asked quietly. That was when I realized something was really wrong. Daniel admitted he'd been hearing the same footsteps for weeks, but tried to ignore them. "It's probably just the pipes," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. I nodded, pretending to believe him, but deep down, I knew pipes didn't sound like footsteps. That night, I set up my phone in the hallway. I positioned it low, facing down the corridor, and hit record. If there was someone messing with us, I'd catch them. The next morning, I checked the footage. First, everything looked normal. The hallway was still and empty. I sped through the video, stopping at 2:17 a.m. That's when the sound kicked in. Footsteps, clear, deliberate, echoing through the empty hall. But there was no one there. I felt a cold sweat creeping over my skin. My heart pounded as I watched the footage, seeing nothing but an empty hallway and hearing the unmistakable sound of someone walking. Then, at 2:19 a.m., something changed. The shadows on the floor shifted. I squinted, breath caught in my throat. Dark shapes flickered across the linoleum floor, shadows of feet. But there was no body, no legs, just feet, moving straight toward my door. Then the video cut to black. The recording just stopped. I tried to play it again, but the last few seconds were corrupted. Daniel, looking over my shoulder, whispered, "Dude, what the hell?" Neither of us had an answer. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering in my chest. The footage played over and over in my head, the shadow feet moving toward my door, the way the video cut out just before they reached me. Something about it felt deliberate, as if it knew I was watching, as if it wanted me to see. Daniel refused to talk about it. He spent most of the evening with his headphones in, pretending nothing was wrong, but I could tell he was just as shaken as I was. We didn't talk about the video, but we didn't delete it either. It sat there on my phone like some kind of warning. The next night, I set up another camera. This time, I used my old laptop, plugged in so it wouldn't lose power. I angled it differently, making sure it could capture my door as well as the hallway. If anything happened, I wanted to see it. I needed proof. I hit record and climbed into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin, phone clutched tightly in my hand. I wasn't sure if I wanted to watch live or not. A part of me wanted to keep my eyes shut, to pretend nothing was happening. But another part, a deeper, more terrified part, knew that wasn't an option anymore. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the footsteps started. Soft, deliberate, the same pacing rhythm I had come to dread. I kept my eyes closed, forcing my breathing to stay steady. I could feel the weight of the room shift, like the air had grown heavier. My stomach twisted as the footsteps grew louder. They weren't just in the hallway anymore. They were right outside my door. And then the door handle moved. I felt my entire body go cold. The metal handle twisted slightly, like someone was testing the lock. My breath hitched in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to move, to jump out of bed, to grab something, anything, to defend myself. But I couldn't. I was frozen, heart pounding so loudly I was afraid whatever was outside would hear it. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. Silence. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing. Slowly, I reached for my phone and checked the live feed. The hallway was empty. But my door, it was open. Not much, just a crack. But enough. I sat up slowly, my entire body tense. The air in the room felt wrong, like something had just been there and left the second I moved. My laptop was still recording, the small red light blinking steadily. I hesitated before closing the door, clicking the lock into place with shaking fingers. Then, without another word, I crawled back into bed and forced myself to wait for morning. The next day, I checked the footage. And that's when I saw it. At 2:18 a.m., the shadow feet appeared again, moving toward my door. They stopped just outside. Then the handle turned. I held my breath as I watched the video, dread pooling in my stomach. And then the door creaked open, just a sliver. And in that tiny opening, in the deepest part of the shadow, something peeked inside. A shape, a head, no eyes, no face, just darkness. And then, the worst part, it turned toward the camera. The screen glitched, and then the recording cut out. I slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering. Something was in our dorm. Something new we were watching. And now I was sure it was watching us too. I didn't tell Daniel what I saw. Couldn't. If I did, I knew he'd leave immediately, and I didn't want to be alone in that room. But I also couldn't unsee it. The way that head peeked inside, featureless and dark. The way it turned toward the camera. Like it knew it was being watched. Like it knew I was going to see it. That night, I locked the door. Twice. Then I dragged my desk chair in front of it for good measure. I didn't care how paranoid it looked. I wasn't taking any chances. Daniel said nothing. He had barely spoken all day, avoiding eye contact, pretending he didn't hear the sounds last night. He was trying to act normal, but I could tell he was afraid too. We both stayed up late, pretending to scroll through our phones, neither of us wanting to be the first to fall asleep. But eventually, exhaustion won. I don't remember closing my eyes. I just remember the sound that woke me up. Knocking. Slow, deliberate knocking on our door. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. The room was dark, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming. But then, the knocking came again. 3 slow, heavy taps. I turned to Daniel. He was awake too. His wide eyes met mine, his face pale in the glow of his phone screen. He had heard it too. Neither of us moved. We just stared at the door, waiting, listening. The room was suffocatingly quiet. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera app, and aimed it at the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it still. The screen showed nothing. Just the plain wooden door, shut tight, the chair still braced against it. No shadows, no movement. Then, the handle started to turn. Daniel gasped, scrambling backward in bed. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the handle twist, the lock resisting as something tried to push it open. The chair in front of the door creaked as it shifted slightly. Then silence. For a long, horrible moment, nothing happened. The handle didn't move again. The knocking didn't return. The room was deathly still. Then, from outside the door, a whisper. "Let me in." My stomach dropped. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't demanding. It was soft, almost polite. But there was something wrong about it. Something not human. I turned to Daniel, shaking my head violently. "Do not open it." His face was pale, drenched in sweat. He was gripping his phone like a lifeline. I could see the war in his expression. Fear, disbelief, the desperate need to convince himself this wasn't real. Then the whisper came again. "I know you're awake." My blood ran cold. Daniel lunged for his headphones, shoving them over his ears, pulling the blanket over his head like a child hiding from a nightmare. Maybe that was the right thing to do. I didn't move. I just kept staring at the door, phone still raised, recording. The handle slowly turned back into place. The chair in front of the door sat still and unmoved. And then, without another sound, the footsteps walked away. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Morning came slowly. I don't think either of us spoke until the sun was fully up, when the weight of night had finally lifted. Even then, we barely acknowledged what had happened. Daniel peeled off his headphones and muttered something about heading to class early. I didn't stop him. I just sat there, staring at the door, trying to convince myself I hadn't heard what I heard. But I had proof. My phone was still recording when it happened. I almost didn't want to watch, but I had to know. With shaking hands, I opened the video. At first, it was exactly how I remembered. The door, the chair, the slow turning of the handle. But then, as I strained to hear the whisper again, I noticed something else. The shadow under the door. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. But at 2:18 a.m., right before the knocking started, a thin, dark shadow appeared at the bottom of the door, like someone was standing on the other side. I skipped ahead in the video, my stomach tightening. The knocking, the whisper, "Let me in." Then, right before the footsteps walked away, something else happened. The shadow moved, not like a person stepping back, not like feet turning away. It slithered, stretching unnaturally along the floor, bending in a way that didn't make sense. And then it disappeared. I slammed my phone down, my hands shaking. I couldn't do this anymore. That night, I told Daniel, "We need to leave." He didn't even argue. He just nodded. We packed our things as fast as we could, stuffing clothes into bags, grabbing whatever we could carry. I didn't care about the dorm deposit. I didn't care if I had to sleep on someone's floor. I just wanted out. We were almost at the door when we heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap against the window. We both froze. Slowly, dreading what I was about to see, I turned my head toward the glass. It was dark outside. The third floor of the dorm overlooked nothing but trees and the distant glow of campus lights. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing for someone to stand on. But something was there. A face, pressed against the glass. Featureless, like a smooth mask of darkness. Smiling. I didn't scream. Couldn't. My body wouldn't move. My breath stuck in my throat. The face didn't knock again. It just watched. Daniel yanked open the door. "Go. Go." We ran. We didn't look back. We never went back. A week later, a new student moved into our old room. I never met him, never spoke to him. But one night, I got a text from an unknown number. A single video, shaky, low quality, filmed from a phone. It showed the hallway, dimly lit, empty, except for the shadows. Footsteps, standing right outside his door. I never liked the basement. Even as a kid, when I used to visit my grandfather's house, something about it felt wrong. The air was always too still, the shadows too deep. It wasn't the typical childhood fear of dark places. I didn't mind attics, or closets, or even the woods at night. But the basement felt different. When my grandfather passed away and left me the house, I tried to push those feelings aside. It was an old house, over 100 years old, and old houses had strange noises and drafts. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That's what I thought until I found the door. It was hidden behind an old shelving unit in the farthest corner of the basement, covered in dust and cobwebs. A heavy wooden door, dark oak, with an old iron handle. It was built directly into the basement wall. But here's the thing, this wall backed up to solid earth. There was no room beyond it. There was no reason for a door to be there. It was locked. The handle wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled. But the more I stared at it, the more something uncomfortable settled in my stomach. I searched the basement for a key, checking every old drawer, every rusted toolbox. Just when I was about to give up, I found a small wooden box tucked away in a cabinet. Inside was a single iron key, old and heavy. I hesitated. My skin prickled as I stood in front of the door, key in hand. My instincts screamed at me to leave it alone. But I ignored them. I fit the key into the lock. Click. The door unlocked. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the handle and pulled. The door opened an inch. Darkness. Not an empty storage space. Not stone or dirt like there should have been. Just pitch-black emptiness. Then, something moved in the dark. A shifting shape. A whisper of air brushing against my face. Presence just beyond my vision. I slammed the door shut. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the closed door. The air in the basement felt thicker now, heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. I told myself I was imagining things, that I had just seen shadows shifting in the dim light. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had moved behind that door, and I had let it out. I locked it. My hands were shaking as I jammed the iron key back into the lock and turned it until I heard the sharp click. I stepped away quickly, as if expecting the door to burst open again. Didn't. It just sat there, silent. I should have left it alone. I should have never gone near it in the first place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me from the other side. That night I couldn't sleep. My bedroom was 2 floors above the basement, but I still felt it, the wrongness. Like the door was calling to me, like something was waiting. At around 3 a.m., I finally decided to check the basement camera. I had set it up a few months ago, mostly for security since I lived alone. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old motion-activated camera mounted in the corner. I pulled up the app on my phone and rewound the footage to earlier that night, right after I had locked the door. First, everything was normal. The dim basement, the shelves, the flickering light bulb. Then, at 3:12 a.m., the door creaked open. I stopped breathing. The lock hadn't held. The door had unlocked itself. And then a hand reached out. Thin, bony fingers curled around the edge of the door. The skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tightly over the knuckles. The hand twitched slightly, like it wasn't used to moving. Then, slowly, deliberately, it reached for the camera. And right before the feed cut to black, I swear, the hand waved at me. I threw my phone across the bed and scrambled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. It waved at me. It wasn't just reaching, it wasn't just moving. It knew I was watching. The camera had stopped recording after that. The last frame frozen on the screen was the pale, unnatural hand creeping out from the darkness behind the door. I tried to tell myself the feed had cut out because of a power issue. Maybe the camera had glitched. Maybe it was just old equipment failing. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't explain how the door unlocked itself, or what had opened it. I needed to see for myself. I didn't want to go back down there. Every part of me was screaming not to. But if I didn't, I'd never sleep again. I grabbed my flashlight and crept down the stairs, each step feeling like it was dragging me closer to something I wasn't supposed to find. The air was freezing when I reached the basement door. I hesitated before turning the knob, half expecting it to be locked. But it wasn't. I pushed it open, and the cold rolled over me like a wave. The basement was dark. The light bulb was off. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing as I raised the flashlight, sweeping the beam over the room. Everything looked normal. The shelves were in place. The floor was empty. The door was closed. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move forward. The flashlight beam trembled against the wood as I reached out and pressed my palm against the door. It was cold. Ice cold. I grabbed the handle and twisted. Locked. I stepped back, pulse still hammering, and scanned the room one last time. There was nothing here. No hand, no sign of movement. Just an old basement and my overactive imagination. But then, I felt breath on my neck. A slow, cold exhale right behind me. I turned so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. The beam swung wildly across the basement, my pulse roaring in my ears. There was no one there. But the door behind me, the one leading upstairs, had just shut on its own. I ran. I didn't think. I just moved, lunging for the basement door and yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Locked. It had locked itself. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned, pressing my back against the door, flashlight clutched in shaking fingers. The beam wavered over the basement walls, over the shelves, over the old, closed door at the far end of the room. The silence was suffocating. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, my mind racing for an explanation. Maybe the draft had shut the door. Maybe the old lock had jammed. Maybe, tap, tap, tap. The sound was soft, too soft. It didn't come from the door behind me. It came from the other door, the one that led to nowhere. I froze. The flashlight flickered slightly in my grip. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. More insistent. I didn't move. My body was screaming to run, to kick the basement door down if I had to. But my legs wouldn't cooperate. Then the doorknob turned. The locked door at the far end of the basement, the one that I had shut and secured, was turning from the inside. And then it opened. Not much, just an inch. But enough. Enough for the darkness to spill out, thick and suffocating. Enough for the air to turn ice cold. Enough for me to see what was standing behind it. A figure. Tall. Too tall. Its skin was ashen, stretched too tight over its bones. Its arms were long, fingers curled and twitching as it gripped the edge of the door. And its eyes. It didn't have eyes. Just smooth, empty hollows where they should have been. I finally found my voice. A strangled gasp ripped from my throat as I threw myself against the basement door, slamming my fists against the wood, yanking at the handle. Let me out. The thing behind the door moved. It didn't step forward. It glided. Fast. Straight for me. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember anything but the cold. The way my vision blurred. The way my heart nearly burst out of my chest. Then, the door behind me flew open. I fell backward onto the floor of the hallway, gasping. The second I hit the ground, I kicked out with everything I had and slammed the door shut. I scrambled for the lock, twisting it so hard I nearly broke the key off. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen, waiting for it to knock again. But it didn't. It didn't need to. Because when I finally pulled myself to my feet and backed away, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. The door at the end of the basement, the one that led to nowhere. It was gone. Just a blank, empty wall. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even go back downstairs. I just locked every door in the house, turned on every light, and sat in my bedroom, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. No footsteps. No whispers. No tapping sounds from the basement. Just silence. Too much silence. By morning, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it all. That maybe I had panicked, hallucinated something in the dark. But when I finally worked up the courage to go downstairs, my stomach dropped. The basement door was unlocked. I knew for a fact that I had locked it. I had triple-checked it. But now it stood slightly ajar like an invitation. Or a warning. I didn't want to go inside, but I had to know if it was real. I grabbed my phone, turned on the camera, and slowly pushed the door open. Everything looked the same. The shelves, the concrete floor, the single flickering light bulb. But when I turned the camera toward the far end of the basement, my blood ran cold. The door was back. The same heavy wooden door with the iron handle. The same door I had seen vanish into the wall the night before. I felt dizzy. My legs shook as I stepped forward, my phone still recording. The door shouldn't be there, but it was, as solid and real as the rest of the basement. And then, my phone screen glitched. The camera flickered, the image distorting for just a second. But in that second, I saw something in the reflection. A face, not mine, watching me from behind. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my phone. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the basement. But I was alone. At least I thought I was. Then I noticed something new. Something written on the basement wall. Words, scratched deep into the concrete. A single message. Don't open the door again. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran. I left the house that day and never came back. I put the house up for sale. I didn't care how much I lost. I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. I just wanted to be as far away from that basement as possible. A few weeks later, I got a call from the real estate agent. She sounded annoyed. "You could have told me about the basement," she said. My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "The door." Her voice was sharp. "The one in the basement. The buyers said it won't stay locked." My mouth went dry. "They changed the lock," she continued. "But it still keeps unlocking by itself." I didn't say anything, because I knew. It wasn't their house anymore. It never had been. It belonged to whatever was behind that door. And now, it was open. I shouldn't hear anything from the ceiling. My apartment is on the top floor. There's no unit above me, just the roof. But for the past few weeks, I've been waking up to the sound of scratching and shuffling above my bed. At first, I told myself it was just rats or maybe pigeons. The building was old, the insulation probably thin. But the sounds weren't random. They were deliberate, pacing, like someone was up there walking. The worst part? It always happened at exactly 2:33 a.m. The first time I heard it, I ignored it. The second time, I turned on some music to drown it out. By the third night, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening as whoever was up there moved from one end of my apartment to the other. One night, the sounds got louder. Thud, thud, thud. I sat up, heart pounding. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a broom and slammed it against the ceiling. The footsteps stopped immediately. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, bang. A single, deafening bang directly above my head. Like something huge had just dropped onto the ceiling. I bolted out of bed, my pulse hammering. The air in the room felt wrong. Too thick, too heavy. Like something was pressing down on me. I stared at the ceiling, waiting, listening. And then, just barely audible, a whisper, coming from inside the ceiling. "I hear you too." I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the ceiling. The whisper had been clear as day. Soft, almost amused. "I hear you too." The words echoed in my head over and over, making my skin crawl. I wanted to tell myself I had imagined it, that I was overtired, that my brain had turned the rustling of rats into something else. But I knew better. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it up at the ceiling. The plaster was cracked in places, yellowed with age, but nothing looked unusual. No holes. No vents big enough for someone to hide in. And yet, someone or something had whispered to me. I needed proof. I had an old camera I used for recording personal projects. That night, I set it up on my dresser, angled straight at the ceiling, and hit record before climbing into bed. My body was tense, every nerve on edge as I waited. 2:33 a.m. The sounds started. First, the usual soft shuffling. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing, back and forth. I held my breath, forcing myself not to move. Then, the ceiling creaked. Not like old pipes, not like settling wood. It was the sound of weight, like someone was crouching directly above me. And then, tap, 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 a slow knocking from inside the ceiling, directly over my bed. I shot up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight again, shining it wildly at the ceiling. "Who's there?" My voice was hoarse, shaking. Silence. The air was thick with something wrong, like the whole room was holding its breath. The footsteps didn't return. There were no more whispers. But somehow that was worse. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning I checked the footage. For the first few minutes, nothing. Just the dim glow of my nightlight casting shadows along the walls. Then, at 2:33 a.m., the sound started. Footsteps, shuffling, the soft creaking of wood. I watched, feeling my stomach twist into knots. Then, the ceiling panel moved. Just a fraction of an inch. Just enough to shift, but enough to see it. A single dark eye peering down at me. Then the screen glitched, and the recording cut out. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. Something was up there. And now, it knew I had seen it. I sat there, gripping the edge of my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. And I had seen an eye staring down at me from the ceiling. And then the recording had cut out. Not corrupted, not an error message, just gone. Like something didn't want me to see the rest. I swallowed hard and forced myself to reopen the laptop. The file was still there, but when I played it again, the moment after the eye appeared was missing. A full 30 seconds of footage gone. I backed away from the screen, a sick feeling creeping up my spine. Someone was in my ceiling. Or something. I needed to check. I needed to know. Grabbing a flashlight, I dragged a chair into the center of my room and climbed onto it, pressing my palm flat against the ceiling panel. My entire body was trembling, but I pushed up gently. The panel lifted easily. Too easily. Like it had been moved recently. My breath caught in my throat. The space above was pitch black. The smell of dust and stale air rolled over me, thick and suffocating. I shined the flashlight inside, sweeping the narrow crawl space. And then I saw them. Fingerprints, smudged into the dust, dragging marks, like someone had been crawling. The chair wobbled beneath me as I nearly lost my balance. My pulse roared in my ears. I knew then, this wasn't my imagination. Someone had been watching me. I climbed down so fast I nearly tripped. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, ready to call the landlord or the police or anyone. But before I could dial, I heard it. A whisper. "You shouldn't have looked," came from above me. I ran. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of my apartment, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was outside, panting in the cold night air. I didn't go back in. Not that night. Not ever. A week later I moved out. I didn't take most of my stuff, I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone. A few months after I left, I got curious. I searched online for any news about the building, anything weird that might have happened. That's when I found it. A missing persons report. From 5 years ago. A tenant. A man who had lived in my exact apartment had disappeared. No forced entry, no sign of struggle. He had simply vanished. But one detail made my blood run cold. A neighbor had reported hearing strange noises from the ceiling the night before he disappeared. Just like I had. I closed my laptop and never looked back. Because I knew the truth. He hadn't vanished. He was still up there. And now, he had found someone new to watch. Being a food delivery driver means you see a lot of weird things. But most of them are just drunks answering the door in their underwear or people forgetting they even ordered food. Nothing too creepy. That changed the night I delivered to an apartment complex downtown. It was late past midnight. The order was for a single meal, no drinks, no extras. The instructions just said, "Leave at the door." Pretty normal. When I arrived, the building was completely quiet. No cars pulling in. No people coming or going. Just the soft hum of the streetlights buzzing overhead. I found the apartment number, set the bag down, and snapped a picture for proof of delivery. That's when I got the message. "Thank you, but I didn't order you." I frowned. The number matched the one on my order screen. Maybe they meant they didn't order food? I stared at my phone, confused, when another text came through. "Look at the picture." A chill ran through me. I opened my gallery and pulled up the delivery photo. The food was there, sitting neatly on the doormat. But something was wrong. The door was open, just slightly, and someone was standing in the doorway. Not stepping out, not reaching for the bag. Just standing. And the worst part? It was me. Same uniform, same hat, same posture. But the face was wrong. The eyes were too dark, too hollow. And just before I could process it, the figure in the photo did something I'll never forget. It turned its head toward the camera and smiled. I dropped my phone. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the screen, my own reflection staring back at me in the dim glow. It wasn't possible. I had been alone. I had walked up to that door, placed the food down, taken the picture, alone. But the photo said otherwise. I forced myself to pick up the phone, my fingers shaking as I zoomed in. The details made my stomach twist. The figure in the doorway was me, but not me. The uniform was identical, but the skin looked wrong. Too smooth, almost stretched. The eyes dark, empty pits. And that smile wide and unnatural, like it had been painted on. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. Come inside. My entire body went cold. I took a step back from the door, my heartbeat slamming in my ears. I looked up from my phone, half expecting to see the door still cracked open. It wasn't. It was shut. No lights on inside. No movement. Just a silent, ordinary apartment door. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted down the hallway, nearly tripping over myself as I reached the exit. The second I was outside, I jumped into my car, locking the doors with shaking hands. My breathing was ragged, my mind spinning. Then I glanced at my rearview mirror and saw myself sitting in the back seat, smiling. I screamed, whirled around. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I fumbled to start the car, slamming my foot on the gas and tearing out of the parking lot. I didn't care about the speed limits. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. One last message. Picture. It was another delivery photo. But this time the food was on my doorstep. And the person who had dropped it off looked exactly like me. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My apartment. The food was on my doorstep. Something had been there. And worse, it looked like me. I didn't go home. Couldn't. I drove to a gas station instead, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and tried to slow my breathing. My phone sat on the passenger seat, screen glowing, waiting. I didn't want to open the picture again. I didn't want to see that thing standing in my doorway. But my brain wouldn't let it go. My hands shook as I unlocked my phone. The picture was still there, exactly as before. The meal sitting neatly on my welcome mat. And my double standing just beyond the threshold, staring directly into the camera. But something was different now. The door. It was open wider. I was sure it had only been cracked in the first photo, just an inch. Now it was almost halfway open, like it was inviting me in. Then my phone buzzed again. A new message. Where are you? My breath hitched. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen, willing it to stop, willing whatever this was to go away. But another message came. Come home. And then another picture. It was taken from inside my apartment. From my bedroom. From my bed. I dropped the phone, my stomach twisting in pure terror. It was waiting for me, inside my own home. Couldn't go home. Not after that. The picture was taken from my bed. Something, was in my apartment, waiting for me, watching me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The gas station lights flickered overhead, buzzing softly. I wasn't safe here, but I sure as hell wasn't going back there. I needed proof. Real proof. Something I could show someone, something that would make this make sense. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat, screen still glowing. I swallowed hard and picked it up, forcing myself to look at the photo again. The bed. My pillows. The slight mess of blankets I had left behind when I went to work that night. It was definitely my room. But the more I stared at the picture, the more my stomach twisted. Something was off. Then I saw it. The closet door. It was open. I never leave it open. My heart pounded in my ears as I zoomed in, the grainy image sharpening slightly. And there, just barely visible in the darkness of the closet, pair of eyes, staring at me. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. My vision blurred for a second as I tried to think, tried to figure out what to do. Call the cops? Call a friend? Just keep driving and never look back? And then, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Just 3 words. You left the door open. I nearly threw my phone out the window. You left the door open. My door. My apartment door. Was it talking about the front door? The closet? Or something else entirely? My pulse roared in my ears as I sat there, parked under the sickly gas station lights, trying to breathe. Couldn't go home. I knew that much. But I couldn't just sit here forever, either. I needed help. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through my contacts. Who would believe me? What would I even say? Hey, I think my own doppelganger broke into my apartment and sent me photos from inside my bedroom? No, I needed proof. I hesitated, then reopened the camera app on my phone. My breath caught as I looked at the last picture again. The closet door was open. The eyes were still there. But something was different. The blankets, they had shifted, like someone had just moved. I barely had time to react before my phone buzzed again. Another picture. This time it was blurry, like it had been taken mid-motion. But I could still make out the details. It was my apartment hallway, and standing in the darkness, just outside my bedroom door, was me. The shape was wrong, slightly stretched, as if it didn't fully fit inside my skin. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, its mouth open just a little too wide. It was looking for me. Then another buzz. A final message. I'll find you. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the parking lot, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away as possible. But as I drove, one final thought sank into my bones like ice. If it had my face, my voice, my clothes, what if someone else let it in? I never went back. I quit my delivery job the next day. I got a new phone, new number, new apartment. But sometimes, late at night, I hear a knock at my door. Always slow, always deliberate. I don't answer, because no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I know it's still looking for me. The apartment had a great view. That's what sold me on it. The wide living room window overlooked a dense stretch of forest, untouched and quiet. During the day, sunlight filtered through the trees, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the floor. At night, the woods turned into a sea of blackness, stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Peaceful. Or at least it should have been. The knocking started 3 nights after I moved in. First, it was soft. A light tapping against the glass, rhythmic and slow. I thought it was just a branch or maybe a bird, but when I pulled the curtain back, there was nothing there. Just darkness. The trees stood still. The wind didn't blow. The glass was untouched. The next night it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. A little louder this time. More deliberate. I checked again. Still nothing. No wind. No movement. Just my own reflection staring back at me, pale in the dim light. By the 3rd night I stopped looking. I don't know why. Something about it felt wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to see. Like whatever was knocking was just waiting for me to open the curtain. That was the night I heard the whisper, right outside the window. Why won't you look? I didn't sleep after that. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there in the dark, every muscle in my body locked in place. The whisper had been right outside the window. Too close. Too real. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. Something was out there. The knocking came again. Tap, tap, tap. Slow. Insistent. Waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the blankets over my head like a child hiding from a nightmare. My mind raced. Should I call the police? What would I even tell them? That someone was knocking on my 3rd-floor window in the middle of the night? Then another whisper. Please, just look. It was softer this time, almost pleading. I curled up tighter, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to see. I knew, deep in my bones, that if I looked, something terrible would happen. Then, scraping. A slow, dragging sound against the glass. Like nails. Like fingers. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. A slow, deliberate movement, tracing along the window pane. Searching. Feeling. Looking for a way in. And then silence. I stayed awake until sunrise. When I finally worked up the courage to check the window, the glass was clean. No smudges. No handprints. No sign that anything had been there at all. But I knew the truth. It was waiting for me to slip. Waiting for me to look. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. The knocking. The whisper. the scraping on the glass. Maybe it was just sleep deprivation. Maybe I was hearing things. I tried to push it out of my mind, but deep down I knew. Something was out there. That night, I sat on my couch, facing away from the window. I kept the curtains shut tight. The TV was on, volume turned up just enough to drown out the silence. I refused to acknowledge the window. I refused to even glance in its direction. Tap, tap, tap. I flinched. The knocking was louder this time, more urgent. My fingers clenched into the couch cushion. I didn't look. I wouldn't. But then the voice came again. I know you can hear me. It was closer, right on the other side of the glass. A chill crept up my spine. I gritted my teeth, forcing my eyes to stay locked on the TV. It's not real. It's not real. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, everything was silent. And then, something pressed against the window. I didn't see it, but I heard it. The faintest sound of skin against glass. Like a palm. Like a face. It stayed there for what felt like an eternity. Breathing. Then the voice whispered one last time. You'll have to look eventually. I turned up the volume on the TV. I didn't sleep that night, and I never looked at the window again. I didn't leave my apartment the next day. I kept the curtains shut. I kept the lights on. I ignored the window. Every time I walked past it, I felt it. That horrible, pressing feeling. Like something was standing just beyond the glass. Watching. Waiting. That night, I sat on the couch again. TV blaring. Trying to pretend everything was normal. Trying to ignore the window. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Tap, tap, tap. I gritted my teeth. Not this time. I wasn't going to react. But then the curtain moved. Not much. Just a ripple. Like something had brushed against it from the other side. A sharp chill ran down my spine. My hands clenched into fists. I wasn't going to look. I wasn't. Then the voice came again. Right behind me. Why are you ignoring me? I jumped, spinning around. The voice hadn't come from the window. It had come from inside the apartment. The room was empty. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scanned every shadow, every corner. But I was alone. Wasn't I? I backed away, chest tight with fear. And then, something dragged its fingers down the window. I heard it. I felt it. It was inside. I ran. I didn't think. I just bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the wood, heart hammering. The voice had been inside. The fingers on the glass inside. I didn't understand. I hadn't looked. I hadn't looked. The apartment was silent now. Too silent. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I unlocked it. I needed help. I needed to call someone. But before I could dial, my screen flickered. A message appeared. No sender. No number. Just 3 words. Look outside now. I bit down a scream and threw the phone across the room. No, I wasn't playing this game. But then, something shifted. Not outside. Behind me, the closet door. It was open. Just a crack. I knew it had been shut before. I knew. But now, it stood slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness spilling into the dim light of my room. And then the whisper came again. You already let me in. I didn't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out from fear, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my window. My phone lay shattered on the floor. The apartment was silent. I forced myself to stand, every muscle stiff and sore. I hesitated before glancing at the window. The curtains were still drawn. The glass was clean. No smudges. No fingerprints. But I knew better. It was still out there. And worse, it was inside too. I moved out the next day. Left everything behind. Found a new place with no windows facing the woods. But sometimes late at night I hear knocking. Not on my new window. On the inside of my closet door. I never open it. And I never ever look. I've always been fascinated by cameras. Not just photography, but the way cameras see things we can't. The way they freeze moments, sometimes revealing details that the human eye misses. I didn't think much of it when I got my new 360-degree camera. A sleek, high-tech gadget that could capture everything around it in a single shot. It was a gift from my brother, something I had mentioned wanting but never actually planned to buy. "Thought you'd like it," he said with a grin. "Takes insane footage. Try it out." I did, and that's when things started going wrong. The first night, I set it up in my living room, letting it record while I watched TV. I wanted to see how it handled different lighting conditions, how smooth the video playback was. When I checked the footage later, everything looked fine at first. The room was exactly as I remembered. The couch, the TV, the faint glow from the streetlights outside. But then I noticed something off. A shadow. At the very edge of the frame. Not on the wall, not a trick of the light, a shape just outside the camera's field of view. I frowned and scrolled through the footage. The shadow was there in every frame, always just barely out of sight. No matter where the camera turned, no matter how I adjusted the angles, the shadow stayed right on the edge. Like it was avoiding the lens. I should have stopped there. But I didn't. I set the camera up again, this time in my bedroom. Just to test. Just to be sure. And when I played the footage back in the morning, I saw it again. Still out of frame. Still watching. And in the final seconds, just before the recording ended, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The shadow moved. Not away. Toward me. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The shadow had moved toward me. Not away, not shifting along the edges like before. It had stepped closer. And the worst part? I never saw its full shape. It always stayed just outside the frame. My hands trembled as I reached for my camera. Maybe it was a glitch, a compression error, something wrong with the playback. But when I checked the file again, the shadow was still there. Moving closer. I rewound the footage, watching carefully. The recording started as normal. Me sleeping. The faint sound of my breathing. Nothing strange. Then, about an hour in, the room got darker. Not like the lights dimming. Like something was blocking them. The shape hovered just beyond the edge of the lens. Barely visible. A smudge of movement, too deliberate to be an error. Then, in the final few seconds of the recording, my stomach turned to ice. The shadow leaned in. A shape human-like, but wrong. A silhouette with no features, no details. Just a void where a person should be. And then, the recording cut out. Not faded, not glitched, just ended. Like something had stopped it. I shut the laptop, heart pounding. I wasn't sleeping here tonight. I grabbed my keys and my bag, leaving my apartment without looking back. But as I locked the door behind me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new notification. The 360-degree camera had started recording on its own. I stared at my phone, my stomach twisting into knots. The camera had started recording on its own. I hadn't set a timer. I hadn't touched it since last night. But now, there was a fresh recording sitting in my files, timestamped just 5 minutes ago. I was outside my apartment. The door was locked. No one was inside. I didn't want to watch it. Every instinct screamed at me to delete the file, throw the camera away, forget this ever happened. But my hands had a different idea. Shaking, I tapped the screen. The video opened. First, nothing. Just my empty apartment. The familiar layout. TV, couch, dim glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. But then I saw it. The bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it before I left. The camera angle shifted slightly, adjusting for movement. Something had triggered it. Then, the shadow moved. Not at the edges this time. In the center. Right there, standing in my living room. I paused the video, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes locked onto the figure. It was me. Or at least something shaped like me. It stood unnaturally still, facing the camera. No features. No face. Just a void in the shape of a person. Then, slowly, too slowly, its head tilted. Not side to side. Forward. Toward the camera. And then, the recording cut out. I nearly dropped my phone. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at the screen. I was outside. I had been outside this entire time. So what the hell was standing in my apartment? And worse, why did it look like me? Couldn't go back inside. I stood outside my apartment, my back pressed against the cold hallway wall, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Something was in there. Something that looked like me. I checked the time. 2:47 a.m. Who the hell could I call? The police? And tell them what? Hey, there's a shadow pretending to be me inside my apartment? No, that wasn't an option. I needed to see if it was still there. Against every screaming instinct, I opened the live feed from the 360 camera. The image flickered to life on my phone. My living room appeared, dim and silent. Empty. The bedroom door was shut now. Had I imagined it? Had my brain twisted shadows into something worse? Then, the screen glitched. Just for a second. A single, stuttering frame. But it was enough. The door was open again. And something was peeking out. Not fully. Not enough to see its face. But I knew it was there. I could feel it watching. The video stuttered again. Now the figure was closer. My breath caught in my throat. It was standing in the living room, facing the camera. But this time it wasn't just a shadow. It had a face. My face. Only the eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too hollow. And it was smiling. Then the worst part. It raised its hand. And waved. The screen glitched. The live feed cut out. I dropped my phone and ran. I don't remember running down the stairs. I don't remember getting into my car. All I remember is the raw, suffocating terror clawing at my chest. My hands shaking so badly I could barely shove the key into the ignition. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat, screen still glowing. I didn't dare pick it up. I didn't want to see if there was another message, another video, another image of it. I drove, fast, no destination in mind, just away. Away from that apartment, away from whatever the hell I had seen. My breaths came out in ragged gasps, my mind racing. That thing had my face. It had waved at me. It knew I was watching. I needed answers. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at my phone like it was a ticking bomb. Then finally I picked it up. A new notification. The 360 camera had recorded again. The file was labeled Final. My stomach twisted as I tapped the screen. The video started. First, the apartment was empty. The camera still stood in the same spot, capturing the whole living room. But something was different. The front door was open. Then movement. Something walked into the frame. Me. Or at least the thing pretending to be me. It moved unnaturally, like it wasn't used to walking. Like it was learning. Its limbs stiff, its head tilting in small, unnatural jerks. And then, turned. To face the camera. My mouth went dry. My own face stared back at me. But the eyes, completely black, endless pits of nothingness. The smile stretched too wide. Then, slowly, it stepped closer. Each movement more fluid, more confident. It was getting better. Better at being me. It stopped a foot away from the camera. The black eyes stared into the lens. And then, it spoke. In my voice. I don't need you anymore. The screen glitched. The video ended. I dropped the phone. My pulse thundered in my ears. And then, in the reflection of my windshield, I saw it. Sitting in my back seat. Smiling. I don't know what happened next. I must have blacked out because when I woke up, it was morning, and I was parked on the side of the highway. My phone was gone. The 360 camera was gone. My apartment key was gone. I didn't go back. I never even tried. But sometimes late at night I feel it. Watching. Waiting. And I wonder, if it took my place that night, then who am I? I work at a small roadside motel just outside of town. It's nothing special. Just a dozen rooms, a front desk, and a parking lot that never quite fills up. Most of our guests are just passing through, truckers, families on road trips, people looking for a cheap place to crash for the night. Nothing exciting ever happens here. At least that's what I used to think. A few months ago, something happened that I still can't explain. Something that still makes me question everything I know about reality. It started like any other night shift. The motel was quiet, with only 2 rooms occupied. I sat behind the front desk, half watching an old movie on my laptop while keeping an eye on the security cameras. I always hated the graveyard shift. The silence, the empty halls, the way the fluorescent lights made everything feel just a little too unnatural. At 2:47 a.m., a man walked in. I barely looked up at first, already reaching for the guest book. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. He didn't say much, just slid a credit card across the counter and took the key to room 6. That should have been the end of it. Just another guest. But when I checked the security feed later, my stomach dropped. The camera showed the front desk. It showed me standing there. It showed the guest taking the key. But the man? He didn't have a reflection in the mirror behind me. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. The motel lobby had a huge wall mirror behind the desk, meant to make the space feel bigger. Every guest who ever stood there appeared in that mirror. Every single one. Except him. I rewound the footage, watching frame by frame. The door swung open. I saw him enter. He walked to the desk. I saw him standing right in front of me. But in the mirror, nothing. Just an empty space where he should have been. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch. Maybe the angle of the light, maybe something wrong with the camera. But deep down I already knew. Something was wrong with that man. And worse, room 6 was already occupied. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. The security feed clearly showed me standing at the front desk, handing the man a key. But in the mirror behind me, he wasn't there. Just an empty space where his reflection should have been. My stomach twisted into knots. Something wasn't right. My mind raced for an explanation, but nothing made sense. A camera glitch? A trick of the light? But then why had I never seen this happen before? Why only him? And then it hit me. Room 6 was already occupied. I grabbed the guest book and flipped through the entries. Checked in yesterday, Robert Hastings, age 63. Paid in cash for 3 nights. That meant room 6 wasn't available. I should have told the man that. But when he handed me his card, when I gave him the key, why didn't I check? A cold chill crept down my spine. I switched back to the security feed, rewinding the footage to watch his movement after leaving the front desk. The man took the key, turned, and walked toward the hallway leading to the rooms. His movements were slow, deliberate. I switched to the hallway camera. My throat tightened. He never arrived at room 6. The footage showed him walking down the hall, but then he just disappeared. One frame, he was there. The next, he was gone. No door opening. No turning a corner. Just gone. My fingers hovered over the phone. Should I call the police? What would I even say? A guest checked into an occupied room and then vanished into thin air? I needed to check the room myself. I hesitated for only a moment before grabbing the master key and stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The air felt thicker now, like the walls were pressing in on me. Each step toward room 6 felt heavier than the last. I reached the door. My hand trembled as I lifted it to knock. I barely touched the wood when the door creaked open. The door to room 6 wasn't locked. It had been left slightly ajar, enough to reveal a sliver of darkness inside. My breath hitched. I had worked here for over a year, and I knew. Guests never left their doors open. Not in a place like this. I forced myself to speak. "Hello, sir?" My voice felt too small in the suffocating silence. No response. The air smelled stale, like dust and something else. Something rotting. I pushed the door open wider. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from the dim hallway behind me. My fingers fumbled for the switch. When the light flickered on, my stomach dropped. The bed was still made, untouched. The guest's bag sat by the door, zipped up, never opened. Everything was exactly as it had been when Robert Hastings checked in, except for one thing: the key. The motel key I had given to the man at the front desk was sitting on the nightstand. I backed up, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Robert Hastings had been here for 2 days. So why was nothing touched? No luggage unpacked. No sign that he had slept in the bed. And where was he? A sickening thought wormed its way into my brain. Had the man in the coat been Robert Hastings? No, that was impossible. The man who checked in last night had been older. The one from tonight was taller, younger. And besides, Hastings had already checked in. I turned to leave. I needed to call someone. The police. My manager. Anyone. That's when I saw it. The bathroom door. It was shut. But just beneath it, peeking out from the gap at the bottom, pair of bare feet, standing perfectly still. My breath caught in my throat. The silence in the room felt like it was alive. And then, before I could move, before I could even think, the light flickered, and the bathroom door slowly began to open. The bathroom door opened an inch. Then another. The feet didn't move. Couldn't breathe. My entire body locked up as the stale, heavy air pressed in around me. The gap between the door and the frame widened, revealing nothing but blackness inside. No bathroom light. No reflection of the pale motel tiles. Just a void. I wanted to run. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn and leave, to pretend I never came here. But my legs wouldn't move. Then, the feet slid back into the darkness. Not stepped. Slid. Like whoever was standing there had been pulled away. The door creaked as it slowly swung all the way open, revealing the bathroom. Empty. My stomach twisted. I stared at the shower curtain. It was shut. A thick, plastic yellow, its bottom edge curling slightly against the tub. Something was behind it. I knew it, and it knew I was here. I forced myself to step forward, my heart slamming against my ribs. Each step felt wrong, unnatural, like I was moving through something thick and unseen. The silence was so deep now that I could hear the ringing in my own ears. My fingers brushed the edge of the curtain. I hesitated, and then I ripped it back. The shower was empty. No one was there. No footprints on the tile. No sign that anyone had ever been in the room at all. But the smell. It was stronger now. Rotten. Stale. Like something old, something dead. I turned to leave, but the light flickered again. And in the mirror above the sink, I saw him, the man in the coat, standing right behind me. His face wasn't blurry now. And the reason he had no reflection at the front desk? He had no face at all. Couldn't move. Couldn't blink. My reflection stood frozen in the motel mirror, and behind me him, the man in the coat, the one I had checked in, the one who had no reflection. But now I could see him, and I wished I couldn't. His face was wrong. Not blurred, not hidden, missing. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin stretched too tightly over his skull, as if something had erased his identity completely. And yet, I felt him watching me. The air around me turned thick, suffocating. My pulse thundered in my ears as I fought the urge to run. He was standing right behind me, but there was nothing there. I could see him in the mirror, but I couldn't feel him. No breath on my neck. No shadow stretching across the tiled floor. Then, his head tilted. Slow. Deliberate. Like he was acknowledging me. I choked on a gasp and spun around. The bathroom was empty. I backed out of the room so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My breath came in sharp, panicked bursts as I fumbled for the hallway light switch. The bulb flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. No one was here, but I knew I wasn't alone. The guest book, the missing reflection, the untouched bed, the key that returned itself. This man, asterisk asterisk if he had ever been a man, asterisk asterisk wasn't a guest. He had never been a guest. He had always been here. I needed to get out. I turned and ran, sprinting down the hallway toward the lobby, my heart slamming in my chest. As I reached the front desk, I gasped for air, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I needed to leave. Quit this job, burn this place down, I didn't care. Then the bell rang. That small, rusted service bell guests used when the clerk wasn't paying attention. I froze. Slowly, I lifted my head. A room key sat on the counter. Room 6. And the guest book? There was a new entry. A name, written in shaking, uneven handwriting. My name. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember quitting. The next thing I knew, I was miles away, driving without knowing where I was going. I never looked back. I don't even know if the motel is still there. But sometimes, late at night, I have dreams. I'm standing at a front desk, an old guest book in front of me. The bell rings. A man in a coat slides a card across the counter. I look up to check his reflection, and I see nothing. Then I wake up, and there's a room key on my nightstand. Room 6. It started with whispers. Faint, almost too soft to hear, like the sound of someone murmuring just out of reach. My son, Ben, was the first to notice. He's only 6, too young to be scared of things like ghosts or monsters. To him, everything strange is just another part of the world. Something to be questioned, not feared. Daddy, the man talks to me at night. I nearly dropped my coffee. The man? I knelt beside him, trying to keep my voice light. What man, buddy? Ben shrugged, swinging his legs under the kitchen table. The one in my room. He whispers. My stomach tightened. What does he say? Ben frowned, thinking. I dunno. He just talks. It had to be his imagination. Maybe a dream, maybe the wind outside his window. Kids hear things all the time, right? But then, that night, I heard it too. It was just past 2 a.m. when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had stirred me. Then I heard it. A soft, distant whisper drifting from Ben's room. I sat up, my pulse quickening. The baby monitor was on my nightstand, its small green light blinking steadily. I reached for it with shaking hands and pressed the volume up. First, nothing. Just the usual rustling of sheets as Ben shifted in his sleep. Then, a voice. Low, hollow. Not my son's. Can you hear me? I nearly dropped the monitor. The voice wasn't coming from Ben. It was coming from somewhere else. I jumped out of bed and ran to his room. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. An open window, maybe? A toy making noise? But when I got there, Ben was sound asleep. The window was shut. His nightlight cast soft shadows on the walls. Nothing was out of place. And yet, the air felt wrong, like someone else had just been there. I checked the monitor again. The whispering had stopped. But before I could turn it off, I heard one last thing. A voice cold and clear. He knows we're listening. I barely slept after that. And the next morning, I ordered a camera for Ben's room. That night, I tucked Ben in like normal. He didn't mention the voice, and I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to scare him. But as I turned off the light, I hesitated. Hey, buddy, I said softly, keeping my voice casual. If the man talks to you again, let me know, okay? Ben blinked up at me. Okay, Daddy. I forced a smile, ruffled his hair, and left the room, shutting the door just enough to let the hallway light spill in. Then, I went back to my own bedroom, opened the camera app on my phone, and started watching the live feed. First, nothing happened. I lay in bed, phone propped against my pillow, staring at the screen. Ben shifted under his blankets, turning over in his sleep. The soft hum of white noise from his sound machine filled the room. Normal. Everything looked completely normal. Then, at 2:13 a.m., the screen glitched. Just for a second. A flicker of static. I sat up, heart pounding. Did the camera just malfunction? Ben stirred slightly, his tiny body shifting under the blankets. Then, a voice. Low, distant, but not from Ben. Are you awake? I swallowed hard. The whisper was coming from inside the room. Ben murmured something in his sleep, rolling onto his side. Then the voice came again. He's watching. I nearly dropped the phone. My blood ran ice cold. It wasn't talking to Ben this time. It was talking about me. I fumbled to turn on the bedroom light, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The moment the bulb flickered on, I glanced back at the phone. The screen was completely black. The camera had turned off. I bolted out of bed and ran to Ben's room. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, heavy, still. Ben was sleeping soundly, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. But the camera, ***, the brand new camera, ***, was tilted downward. as if someone had moved it. My stomach clenched. No, that wasn't possible. I had secured it to the shelf. Couldn't just fall. Hands shaking, I grabbed it and checked the footage. The last thing it had recorded before cutting out? Ben, asleep in his bed. And just behind him, a dark shape, standing in the corner. Watching him, I stared at the screen, my body frozen. There was someone in the room. A tall, shadowy figure, standing in the farthest corner, half hidden in the darkness. It didn't move. It didn't shift. It just stood there, watching my son. The footage cut out right after that. No sound. No distortion. Just gone. I felt sick. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the camera. I turned toward Ben, who was still asleep, completely unaware that something someone had been in his room. But the door was shut. The window was locked. There was nowhere for anyone to go. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths. I needed to check the rest of the house. I stepped out into the hallway, heart pounding in my chest, scanning every shadow. The living room, the kitchen, the front door, locked. I hesitated before checking my own room. The bed was unmade, the blankets tangled from where I had jumped up moments ago. My phone sat on the nightstand, the camera app still open. And then I noticed something. The closet door. It was open, just an inch. I knew for a fact that it had been closed before I went to bed. Slowly, I stepped forward, my breath shallow. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. I didn't want to do this. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone. But I had to know. With one quick motion, I yanked the door open. Nothing. Just my clothes hanging still and untouched. Boxes stacked in the corner. Shoes lined up neatly. No intruder. No shadowy figure. Then, just as I was about to close it, I heard it. A whisper. From inside the closet. He's still watching. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly tripped. My pulse roared in my ears as I slammed the door shut, locking it without thinking. There was no one there, but I had heard it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told Ben we were staying somewhere else for a while. I didn't care if it made me look crazy. I packed a bag for both of us, grabbed my laptop, and we left. I didn't check the camera again until we were safe in a hotel. And when I did, there was a new recording, one I hadn't started. I hesitated before pressing play. The screen was completely dark. No sound, no movement, just static buzzing faintly in the background. Then, a voice, cold, hollow, right next to the microphone. You shouldn't have watched. The screen cut to black, and the file deleted itself. I never went back to that house. I hired movers to pack my things. I didn't tell them why, just paid extra to have them leave the boxes outside my new place. Ben never mentioned the man in his room again. But sometimes late at night I hear whispers. Not outside. Not from another room. From the baby monitor. And I know wherever we go it follows. I've always been bad about locking my front door. It's a terrible habit, I know, but I live alone in a quiet neighborhood, and nothing bad has ever happened. At least that's what I thought. A few weeks ago, I bought a small security camera and placed it near the entrance, aimed directly at my front door. Not because I was worried about anything, more out of curiosity. I wanted to see how often I actually forgot to lock it. The first few nights, the footage was boring. I'd leave for work, come home, sometimes forget to lock the door, and then go to bed. Completely normal. But on the fourth night, I noticed something. At 2:33 a.m., the doorknob turned. Slowly, deliberately, I froze, staring at the footage. I hadn't gotten up. I hadn't left my room. And yet, the video clearly showed the door unlocking by itself. I checked the rest of the recording. The door creaked open an inch. Then two. But the hallway outside was empty. No one entered. No one left. The door just opened. Then, after a few minutes, it slowly shut again. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the edge of my desk. Did I forget to lock it? Did the wind push it open? I needed to be sure. That night, before bed, I triple-checked the lock. I jiggled the handle, tested the deadbolt. The door was secure. Then, I set the camera to live mode and placed my phone next to me on the nightstand. If anything happened, I would see it. I fell asleep watching the screen. At 2:33 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected at front door. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. The screen showed my front door. Still shut. Still locked. But the handle was turning. And this time from inside the apartment. Couldn't breathe. The handle was moving. Not jerking wildly, not forced, just a slow, deliberate turn. Like someone inside my apartment was testing it. Trying to get out. But I was alone. My phone trembled in my hands as I watched the live feed. The door didn't open. The handle simply twisted back and forth like whoever, whatever, was on the other side hadn't quite figured out how to work the lock. Then suddenly, it stopped. The handle turned back into place. The door sat perfectly still. And then, for the first time, I saw it. A shadow. It was faint, barely visible in the dim glow of the hallway night light. But it was there, standing just outside the frame of the camera. Not moving. Not shifting. Just watching. My entire body went cold. There was someone in my apartment. Someone the camera hadn't picked up entering. I threw the blanket off and grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon. A metal flashlight from my nightstand. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I crept toward the hallway. The apartment was silent, except for the distant hum of the fridge. I reached the door. It was still locked, still shut. I forced myself to turn around, slowly scanning the apartment. My bedroom? Empty. The living room? Empty. The kitchen? My heart nearly stopped. The kitchen chair was pulled out. I knew for a fact I had pushed it in before bed. Something had been sitting there, watching me, and then, just as I was about to turn back, the chair moved. Just an inch. Just enough to scrape against the tile. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, slamming the door behind me, my pulse hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The night air was freezing, but I barely felt it. I turned to look at my apartment window, and there, standing just behind the glass, was a shape, a human-like figure, standing inside my apartment, looking out at me, and then, smiled. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The figure stood in my apartment window, staring directly at me, his head tilted slightly as if curious. The dim glow from my hallway cast just enough light to make out its outline, human-shaped, but wrong. And then, in one slow, deliberate motion, it smiled. Not a normal smile. Not something a person would do. Its mouth stretched too wide, too unnatural, as if it was still learning how to make expressions. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was across the parking lot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My phone was still clutched in my hand, fingers locked so tightly around it that my knuckles ached. I fumbled to open the camera feed again. The window was empty. Whatever had been watching me was gone. I forced myself to think. The door was locked. I had never heard it open. I had watched the handle turn, but the door itself had never moved. So how did it get inside? I needed help. I called the police. I expected them to laugh me off, tell me it was just my imagination. But when I explained that I had been home alone, had video proof of my door unlocking by itself, they agreed to send someone over. I waited by the curb, arms wrapped tightly around myself, my whole body trembling. The officers arrived within 10 minutes. 2 of them. They asked me to stay outside while they checked the apartment. I nodded. I didn't want to go back in. I watched as they entered. Their flashlights swept across the living room, the kitchen, the hallway leading to my bedroom. I waited, heart hammering in my chest. Then one of the officers called out, "There's no one here." I felt a cold wave of relief, but it didn't last long. The second officer stepped out of my bedroom. His expression was unreadable. "Sir," he said, voice carefully controlled. "Are you sure you were alone tonight?" My mouth felt dry. "Yes." He hesitated. "Then you need to see this." I followed him inside. Every muscle in my body was tense, my skin crawling with unease. He led me to my bedroom, to my closet. The door was wide open. That wasn't how I left it. Then I saw what was inside. Pile of clothes. Neatly folded. Not my clothes. I had never seen them before in my life. And on top of the pile, resting perfectly centered, a motel key. For room 303. I don't live near a motel. I stared at the key. A small, plastic motel key with room 303 printed in faded gold lettering. I had never seen it before. I had never been to a motel. But someone had left it in my closet. The officer beside me shifted uncomfortably. "Does this belong to you?" I shook my head, my mouth too dry to speak. It started with little things. First, I barely noticed. A coffee mug in the wrong place. A chair pulled out when I swore I had pushed it in. A blanket folded differently than I had left it. Stupid, everyday things that I brushed off. Maybe I was distracted. Maybe I was just tired. But then it got worse. One night, I came home from work and dropped my keys on the counter like always. I went to take a shower, and when I came back, my keys were gone. I searched everywhere. The counter, the floor, my pockets. I was starting to panic when I finally found them. On the kitchen table. Right in the center. I don't leave my keys there. Ever. I stared at them. A cold chill creeping up my spine. I lived alone. So how did they move? I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had put them there without thinking. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down something felt off. And then, a few nights later, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening. Not creaking. Not swinging open from a draft. Opening. Deliberate. Slow. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then footsteps. Soft. Measured. Coming toward my bed. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. Barely able to turn on the flashlight. I swung it up, aiming toward the doorway. Nothing. The room was empty. But my closet door? It was open. And I knew, without a doubt, that I had shut it before bed. I lay there in the dark, staring at the open closet door, my heart racing. There was no one in the room. No sounds, no movement. Just the eerie, oppressive stillness that followed the footsteps. But I knew something had been in here. Something was in here. I couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe. The seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. And then, just as I was about to convince myself that I had imagined it, I heard it again. A soft click. The bedroom door shutting. I bolted upright, scrambling to grab my phone and turn on the flashlight. My hands were trembling so violently I almost dropped it. But the room was still empty. The door was shut. The closet, still open, stared back at me like an invitation. I jumped out of bed and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. I didn't care if it seemed paranoid. I was paranoid. Someone had been in my room, in my space, and I didn't know how or why. I checked the apartment, every room, every corner. The locks were still in place. No windows were open. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing. But it wasn't over. That night, I set up a camera in my bedroom. If someone was coming in when I was asleep, I needed to know. I had to know. I fell asleep with the camera rolling, my phone beside me, ready to check the footage if anything happened. But when I woke up the next morning, I knew something was wrong. My phone was gone. The camera was off. I scrambled to find it. I checked the desk, the nightstand, even under the bed. Then I found it. On the kitchen table. Just like my keys. Couldn't breathe. My pulse pounded in my ears. I hadn't left it there. I hadn't even moved it from my nightstand. I played the footage from the night before. The camera showed me sleeping, the quiet hum of the room in the background. But then, around 3 a.m., the footage flickered. The camera moved. Slowly, deliberately, it tilted downward, capturing the edge of the bed. And then my door opened. A shape entered the room. Not fully visible, not in focus, but I could tell it wasn't me. It was someone else. The shape moved closer to the bed. It stood at the foot of it for a long time. And then, slowly, it reached out, touched me. My body jerked in my sleep. The figure touched my shoulder with a cold, deliberate pressure, and for a brief moment, just a second, I saw its face. It looked like me. But not quite. It was me, but it wasn't. The face was too pale. Too smooth. The eyes, empty. The recording cut out. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. The thing in the video looked like me. Same height, same posture, same hair. But its face was wrong. The skin was stretched too tight, too pale. The eyes empty, black pits. No emotion, no life. And it had touched me. My stomach twisted. My mind screamed for an explanation. A break-in? A glitch? A dream? But deep down I already knew this thing wasn't human. And worse? It knew I had seen it. My hands shook as I set the phone down. My apartment was dead silent. Too silent. I forced myself to breathe, to think. What do I do? Where do I go? Then I noticed something. The closet door. It was open again. My pulse roared in my ears. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. But now, the door stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. And something was standing there. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching me. A soft whisper crawled through the silence. I don't need you anymore. I ran. I didn't grab anything. I just bolted. I didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing. I glanced up at my apartment window. The lights were on, and standing there behind the glass was me, smiling. I never went back. The landlord called a week later, saying my things were still inside, asking if I planned to return. I told him no. I told him to get rid of it all. I don't know where it is now, but sometimes when I check my reflection in a mirror, for just a split second, I see it blink when I don't.